If you know anything about the other side, you have to imagine there's like a glass wall that when they bump into you, it's just as scary for them to see somebody living as it is for us to see somebody from the other side or catch a glimpse of them.
Cockington is a small village that lies between the southern slopes of Dartmoor and the sea in southern England. It's surrounded by lush green pastures, and it has an almost picture postcard beauty, with its neat rows of whitewashed cottages with their clipped thatched roofs and its narrow winding streets. At its centre lies the village green and an ancient coaching inn. The Drum Inn has a long history, but in more recent times it had a reputation as a haunt for bikers. In the 60s and 70s, motorcyclists gathered here from all over southern England.
Going back about 15 years ago, the Drum Inn was well known in the area as being a biker's pub. It was a gradual thing that had occurred over a period of time, but in about the mid-70s, you couldn't come anywhere near Cockington without seeing swarms of motorcycles. The problem then was a commercial thing, was that it was putting off other types of visitors to the area, and to the pub in particular. Families would drive up to the pub and see hordes of motorcycles parked outside.
What is less well known, indeed it's known only to a small group of people, is that the inn also has a ghost. A ghost, or an apparition it seems, of a motorcyclist, dressed in full leather gear. He has been experienced at various times over the past 5 or 6 years, in particular by the 3 or 4 people who live and work here.
It's late one night. Normally I can run up and down to the cellar, absolutely no problem whatsoever. But we just closed, so I was doing all my usual cellar work that I had to do. And as I went down into the cellar, I carried on down. As I hit the actual cellar floor, I came over with an immense sense of chill and cold, and I could hardly move. It was quite frightening at the time, looking back on it. I mean, it doesn't affect me now, but it just happened this once where, you know, this presence made itself known.
Quite often when I'm working alone in the cellar, I catch things out of the corner of my eye, look round expecting people to be standing behind me, and hearing things that I really can't explain.
Within the first year of us living here, I noticed there was always somebody behind me, or a movement at the corner of my eye. I could never quite understand what it was. And one winter's evening, I was working in the kitchen, and somebody came in through the door. And my dog, who is a guard dog, would usually bark very loudly, or if it was a member of staff, would wag her tail and be very excited. And this evening, she just didn't move, she didn't stir. And this person walked down in a leather biker gear, with a helmet and everything like that. And I couldn't work out who he was, and he was taking his gloves off. And he turned to walk down where you hang your coats up. At this time of year, all the back doors are locked, because obviously for security. And as I walked to meet him, he totally vanished and disappeared. And I just couldn't understand, you know, what it was. But I saw it so clearly, and even to this day, I know exactly what I saw and how I saw it.
Until a couple of years ago, that was about as far as it went. Then a pop group from Plymouth was invited to play at the inn. The lead singer was a young woman called Chrissy. She had a slightly unusual background. She'd been brought up as a gypsy, and she would describe herself as a sensitive. At one point in the evening, the entire group was invited down into the cellar.
We were sort of, I think, just sitting around being sociable, and something was said to the landlady about the history behind the pub, and I think that initiated something on the lines of a mysterious happening, or something had been felt, a presence of some sort. I think she sort of was quite interested to see whether I could actually pick anything up. So I think in the heat of the excitement, everybody trundled down to the cellar to sort of see if they could feel or see something. I don't know what their expectations were, whether they were expected to see this floating sheet above them and go, ooh, but they sort of seemed, it very quickly calmed down, and the minute they got that got down there, they realised that something wasn't going to materialise, or it wasn't quite as clear cut as people imagine. And at that point I said, would you mind leaving me on my own? So they did.
Within a few minutes of the others leaving, Chrissy began an encounter with a spirit, or an entity, call it what you will, that if you accept it at face value, takes us into a different world. It seems to give a most extraordinary view of what is often called the other side.
Right in the corner of that cellar is it looks like a huge cupboard, and the minute the sort of air cleared, he just walked out and said hello, and we just immediately got into conversation with each other. I didn't ask him the sort of questions that people would automatically think of asking, like, how did you die? How long have you been dead? It's actually like talking to somebody else who's living, but acknowledging the fact that there are some personal questions that you don't ask. He was about 5'9" or 10, medium build, quite long in the legs, and completely dressed in leather with large boots. And he held his helmet the whole time, his crash helmet, under his arm. It never moved from his body. It was almost like it was attached to him. Obviously everything was black. I don't really remember much about his facial features because I couldn't really see him that well in the light. He spoke with a sort of local accent, but again it's hard to actually remember exactly what his dialect was.
Chrissy claims that she had what amounts to a conversation with the young motorcyclist, in which he described his continuing life or existence or being. It's difficult to know what word to use. Almost as if there had been no interruption, no discontinuity. She claims, for example, that he described how he still spends hours polishing and cleaning his bike, even chatting to his mates.
It was his private place. He liked to be there. He spent time with his friends. It was good, happy times, peaceful times, cleaning his bike, sitting, talking, just having time out, I think, from the everyday burdens that all of us face, during the day, whether it's work or other commitments. And that he wanted to make sure that I knew that it was his private domain. He didn't want that interrupted at all, and that he was quite shy and very apologetic at the hint of upsetting anybody or causing any anxiety. So I think what was so noticeable about him was that as a biker he was really quite shy and reserved. So it seems obvious to me that it was a great effort for him to come out and speak to me. I think he must have heard everybody trundle down to the cellar.
In her quite extraordinary account, Chrissy creates a picture that has echoes of ancient civilizations in Egypt and China and elsewhere, where people were buried with their possessions and their musical instruments and so on, to continue their life on the other side. She claims, for example, to have talked with the ghostly biker even about the music he still listened to.
The music that he referred to was very much the sort of music of the 70s, the Born to Be Wild stuff, and anything that was to do with the masculinity of riding a bike. Because he was a shy type, he didn't seem to be that keen on the real aggressive rock that's out. I think he just enjoyed the sort of 70s stuff, really. I think sort of bikers, their own language is through their clothes, obviously the machine they ride, and the language of music, so that's quite significant. I felt that the time that he gave me was very precious anyway, and I didn't feel it was right to keep him.
The extraordinary encounter in the basement of the village inn between the singer and the biker's ghost contained such extraordinary detail that we decided to call in an internationally known psychic medium to see if he could make contact, and if so, would the accounts match up. We gave him no information other than the fact that there had been a number of sightings. When he arrived at the inn, Peter, the medium, spent some time exploring the house, and then he sat down in a particular corner, as it happened, where several strange experiences had taken place. And almost immediately, he began to hold what can only be described as a conversation with something or someone unseen. But the similarities to Chris's description were quite remarkable.
I've got a young man. He's in his early 20s, perhaps heading up towards 25, 23, 25, something like that. He feels as though he's slim, quite slim, and a bit taller than me, so that makes him, what, 6'1", something like that. He's got a motorbike helmet on, which he's taken off, and his hair comes down to about here on his neck. It's darker hair, much darker than mine, towards the black. He had an accident about 3 or 4 miles away from here. But the reason that he's in here is because this was the local place that he used to come to. This is where his friends were. He feels at home here. And he's made me sit in his seat because this is where he prefers to be. The message that I'm getting is that he, in fact, just before he died, there seems to have been some emotional upset with some young lady, which caused him a great deal of grief and anxiety and led to him, not directly but indirectly, led to him actually having the accident which killed him. It was an accident that killed him, it wasn't a deliberate thing. There's a great deal of sorrow building up around him. I feel a great deal of sadness inside him, and the feeling is that he's been wandering around here for a long, long time, trying to go over, but he's just wanting to say he's sorry. Now, he's talking about people because he's frightened quite a few people by his sudden appearances. And what he's saying is that every so often the emotion, the feeling, the emotion around him gets so strong that he just materializes to other people. He's not materializing to me in that sense at the moment, but other people will no doubt have seen him in a solid form. And this is when he's either attracted to somebody because of the sympathy that they would send out to him, or else the pain that he's suffering at that precise point is too much. Now, he doesn't do this very often. He's talking about 6 appearances that he's made to various people over the last 4 or 5 years especially over the last 4 or 5 years. So he's gradually been building up to a stage where he's asking to be released and to get away from it all.
Peter felt compelled to take some action, to respond to the appeal he claimed to have received. We followed him down to the cellar, to a spot close, in fact, to where Chrissy claimed to have had her encounter. And he began to go through what he described as a release process.
I would ask for those of you who are with me just to be still for a moment and think of him as a person who's been lost for many years in between these worlds and who's now taking a big step in his life because he's going to be free for the first time for a long time. And so what we do is we create an energy into which he can move. Evermore. Come on, sunshine, where are you? Okay, it's all right. Come on, towards me. You're okay. That's it. Okay, come on, you're all right. There's nothing to bother about. You can do it. Just walk into the light. Okay. He's moving forward now towards me. He's actually standing just in front of me now. Okay, it's all right. Just bring yourself forward. That's it. Okay, just step into the light. That's it. Okay, you're in. Okay, and we ask a divine and loving Father that this your servant be received into the light. Amen. Okay. Thank you.
Peter took with him down to the cellar a number of people whom he said were needed to absorb some of the emotional energy of the parting. When we spoke to them immediately afterwards, they clearly had experienced a powerful emotional connection.
Just before Peter was releasing him, I felt I wanted to shout to him, to call him, to make sure that this is the right thing that we were doing, that this is really what he wanted. You know, I had to really hold myself back from calling his name. Not that I really know it, but I just felt I needed to shout, to yell at him, to say, is this right? Is this what you want? Then, once Peter said, you know, that was it, he had gone, and it all happened so very quickly, which surprised me. I thought it was something that would take a while. I felt I wanted him to say, to show us something, that he was fine and that he was safe. I still feel a little bit like that. I felt calmer. While it was all going on, I felt very tingly. My arms were aching. I felt very strange. I can't explain. A bit like having a very mild electrical sensation up my arms. That's still there slightly, but it's gone. But I feel it's like a sad. It's not sad. I can't explain. I just feel very strange.
One has to ask, how much of this is pure theatre, pure hokum? Most scientists would say just about all of it. But is that the whole picture? There is nothing here of the things that science is best at, nothing to measure or to weigh, nothing to run controlled tests on. We're into a different world, a world that has a high emotional or spiritual dimension, certainly a world where science has never been very comfortable. And the same is undoubtedly true of Peter's explanation of what was going on.
Basically, he's some sort of energy form. He hasn't got a body, the same as you and I, but he's got an energy form. Now, his energy form, rightly, shouldn't be on the Earth. And people ask me this question, and I say, well, you've seen relatives die. And you can go and look at a body a few hours after death, and you'll say, there's nothing there. Whatever it is, that spark has gone. Now, in the normal course of events, people will move from one vibration, from one place to another. I mean, religiously, it might be called heaven. But if you think of it in terms of energy, rather than religion, in scientific method, they've moved one vibration to another and they're away. Now, and if a person goes from this world unprepared and not prepared to go, then they can, through no fault of their own really, find themselves in some sort of in-between world of existence. The nearest that I could describe it is like walking through a foggy room, and that you are not where you feel you rightly belong, either here on the Earth because you can't communicate with anybody, except occasionally, in this case, this young man manifested to people on odd occasions, so he did have some form of communication with certain people. But neither was he with those who've also passed over previously. So he's in between the two. I mean, the nearest is being stuck in an escalator between two floors.
That kind of explanation is not unique. It's one that's been expressed by psychic mediums for over 100 years, longer. And the fundamental problem, of course, is that we are out at the very edge of the credible, well beyond the bounds of conventional scientific analysis. That's very frustrating, of course, particularly if you are of a scientific bent and like nice, neat equations. But we have to ask, does that make it any less real?
Anthropologists were very much struck by the fact that the basic spiritual beliefs of people who could not have had any cultural contacts, you know, people living in Patagonia and people living in the North Pole, did appear to have identical spiritual beliefs. And these spiritual beliefs always involve the notion that it is possible for spirits not to know that they're dead and to get trapped into a kind of limbo from which they need to be released, if possible, by the actions of the living. So this seems to be a general belief among all people all over the world, and I would take it that it's true.
My own philosophy is rather dualistic. I think there are one set of laws for the mind and another set for matter, and that what science knows to a very advanced degree are the laws that govern the behavior of matter, and perhaps the laws that govern the behavior even of the brain. But over and above all that, I believe mind is a power in the universe, and that mind can achieve things that are simply not allowed for in the accepted scientific scheme, which is basically a physicalistic picture of reality.
If you're a physicist, you tend to think of the real world as the physical world of 3 dimensions of space, 1 dimension of time, the 4-dimensional world of Einstein. That's what we tend to think of as physical reality. So you say something is real because it exists in that 4-dimensional world, 4-dimensional space-time. But my own view is that we cannot be completely sure that that's what reality consists of exclusively. One has to bear in mind the possibility that there could be a higher level of reality of which the physical world, what we call the physical world, is just a part. So that even though something isn't real in the sense that it's not part of the physical 4-dimensional space-time of physics, conceivably there might be this higher world with respect to which it has a reality.
If we could get back to this state of mind that was probably absolutely taken for granted in ancient Egypt at the time they built the pyramids, say 2500 BC, we would find this whole question of the paranormal completely self-evident and obvious. There wouldn't be any question about it, because they didn't see any distinction between this world and the next. And I'm sure they were perfectly right. I'm sure they could actually see spirits wandering around. Certainly, you know, their priests could. Now, we've deliberately suppressed that faculty because it's useless to us. It would distract us, and would certainly distract us from, you know, building the kind of civilization that we have got. Therefore, it's extremely important that we don't start getting it back.
It has to be said that nothing about the events at the Drum Inn can be described as proven in the scientific sense. But then our minds are difficult to identify, and yet we're all quite sure we have one. There is clearly much more to this world than is dreamt of in the purely scientific philosophy. The $64,000 question, of course, is how much more? It would seem that Chris's encounter lies in that grey area. The conversation she claims to have had with a young man who died all those years ago would seem to raise the most profound questions about what happens after death. Voodoo. It's a strange and powerful word that conjures up all kinds of contrasting images, from melodramatic scenes in Hollywood B-movies to the terror of alien possession. Various forms of voodoo have existed for hundreds of years in the subculture of the West Indies. But the fact is that the practice of voodoo today is stronger than ever, not only in its native Haiti and around the Caribbean and the American Deep South, but wherever Caribbean populations have emigrated, even in London.
Voodoo is African witchcraft. It's practiced in every society. They have different names for it. Some call it obia, some call it jumbi, some people just call it black magic. What it does is it can protect people, it can cause harm, and it's a mixture of Christianity and rituals, all descended from Africa. The Bible is used strongly in voodoo.
At its most benign, voodoo is a kind of religion, steeped in mysticism, with a strong belief in the separation between body and spirit. Living spirits, it's believed, can vacate one body and enter another. But even the spirits of the dead can enter into living bodies.
Well, the voodoo leaders and priestesses and shepherds, they do believe that your spirit wander from your body many a times. And actually, 12 midday is the time when I think your body is at its most vulnerable, because then you don't cast a shudder, which means the spirit has left the body and the body is empty. So the wrong spirit could come back in your body. Yours might be wandering around And when it comes back, there's no space for it because that space has been filled by a spirit that does not belong to your body.
But voodoo has a far more sinister side. Practitioners claim to be able to harness the spirits of the dead and direct them at unfortunate victims, and so create a kind of spiritual weapon which can cause real mental and physical harm, even over great distances.
These spirits can do real harm. They can do serious damage. It can cause mental illness. They can cause physical deformity that you'd never imagine. You have to have death. You have to have spirit of the dead, whether good spirits or bad spirits. Bad spirits we get from people who have died untimely death, people who lived horrible lives. They are the ones whose spirit you could call upon to actually inflict hurt. You can call upon that spirit to inflict any good on anybody because that spirit died miserable.
This extraordinary story of voodoo possession takes place in no more exotic a place than North London, in a very ordinary suburban house. It concerns Gay. She believes that a voodoo attack, aimed at her from faraway Mississippi, has invaded her house and is taking over her life. Gay claims that nameless entities have appeared throughout her house. They've actually attacked her physically.
I've had different kind of things that are here, and these are like animals. I mean, these are from hell itself. I can't even walk out my house and have a break to get away from them. These actually follow me out my room, out of my house to wherever I'm going. And as I'm walking up the street, they're pulling at my jacket. They're kicking stones or something at my legs.
Her husband, John, has also experienced a range of terrifying paranormal events.
I've seen figurines that I know are solid objects move. I've seen smoke coming from places where there's no fire and there's no opening. I've seen shapes that look like people when there's obviously nobody there.
Gay and John were married while John was serving in the American Air Force and stationed in Britain. When John left the forces, they set up house in London. Ultimately, marital problems led John to return to his native Mississippi for a while, and there he entered into a romantic relationship with a former girlfriend.
Well, I more or less met somebody that I knew back in school years ago. And it seemed to be starting out as a casual friendship. But as I've learned, there was nothing casual about it.
An old school sweetheart, supposed to have been. But in fact, she was into voodoo and a lot of herbal things that they used to control people down in Mississippi.
It seems to be a part of the underground culture of Mississippi. You hear about different people spoken in whispers because they say it's not a good idea to speak their name out loud, and the different things that they tend to do to people around them. If they don't like you, they either get rid of you one way or another.
John admits that while he was in Mississippi, he personally took part in voodoo ceremonies. When he returned to London and to Gay, the troubles began.
The woman in Mississippi is to blame for everything.
Seemed like the essence of her plan was to, might as well say, get even with me for, as she sees it, things I've done to her, wrongdoings that I've done to her. And the easiest way to do that was start with whatever was closest to me. And Gay and Cherise were the closest things to me, so the easiest way to get to me was to go after them. I'm not sure how they could transmit that kind of power over this distance, but it's being done. I wish I had the knowledge to understand how they do it. Then I'd stand a better chance of being able to affect stopping it.
The voodoo tradition suggests that voodoo attacks can be transmitted in a number of ways. often working through some object or some item of clothing belonging to the victim.
A curse can be placed on someone by taking bits of their clothing, their fingernails, hair, or stuff like that. And with clothing, it can't be anything new. It must be something that the person has worn, hence perspiration. They don't even have to wear it again. All they have to do is take that to the obeah man or the voodoo man, whatever is going to be put in it, whether it's oil or powder or stuff like that. They take that there and it's placed in it. It can be given to you through food, through stuff thrown around your house, or even if the person don't have anything for you, by just getting to know the person by looking, you can actually have something done to them. You don't have to take anything of the person.
There are some people I have heard rumors of who are practically vegetables because they really have no mind anymore. They've been affected so much by what's been done to them.
Voodoo ceremonies frequently involve groups of people banding together to combine their psychic powers. It raises profound questions about the nature of evil.
It is alarming when one hears that a band of people can cause an attack like this at a distance. But let's look at it at two levels. We know very well that people can band together and cause the most terrible things to happen. We've witnessed it recently in Rwanda, and we've witnessed it in Bosnia. I mean, here we have groups of soldiers killing their neighbours, raping them and so on. Now, it's in our nature that we can group together and behave very basely, and when we gather together we're apt to strengthen the intention to be base. And if we then translate that into the context of the psychic, spiritual level, or more the psychic than the spiritual, if we translate it into that context, with the greater freedom over distance that can offer, it becomes much more understandable. It's only human nature behaving like human nature, but with more power at its elbow.
It seems totally incredible that voodoo or witchcraft practices carried out in faraway Mississippi can be felt here in London. How could that be possible?
The theory we use nowadays suggests that sometimes one bit of matter may influence another bit of matter at a distance, and some experiments carried out in France suggest that this really does happen. They had, in one part of the laboratory, they had something which was being switched at a high speed, and there was a corresponding effect across the other side of the room, and that effect was found so rapidly that even a signal travelling at the speed of light would not have been able to get from one end of the room to the other in time to have an influence. So science does, at any rate, have some strange things connected with distant influence.
The most interesting piece of research that really makes my hair stand up, there are two studies. The first is the one from America, which shows that mind can directly influence matter, the way balls fall. Amazing. The second one is some studies from Mexico that shows that one brain, if it's in empathic contact with another brain, can alter that brain's activity directly. Now, if that's true, then mind can act at a distance. Amazing studies.
We know from many experiments that telepathy works over long distances and just as effectively from one continent to another as from one room to another. This has been shown by various people. Dr. J.B. Ryan, for example, did a lot of work on this.
According to both Gay and John, undoubtedly the most fearful and terrifying aspect of this case is that the evil powers in Mississippi have even attempted, and Gay claims succeeded, in attacking gays sexually.
As to whether or not this presence could rape her, yes, because the physical effects that I've seen, like when she has cuts on her legs that seem to just come from nowhere, or she has a bruise that just shows up mysteriously. She hasn't banged herself anywhere, but a bruise comes up for nothing. It's like if they can affect her physically like that, of course they could rape her.
In my experience, sexual assaults are often associated with severe hauntings and with the sort of attack that we've been associated with in this program. And these sexual assaults can take various forms. In the less severe cases, there is the presence of sexual interference, for example, during the early stages of going to sleep or waking up. And a worrying thing for someone like me trying to deal with some of these cases is that the person that's affected by such attack is sometimes unwilling to let it go because of this. They have found some perverse satisfaction.
Them raping her makes you want to go out and do something physically to them. It's like it makes you wish you had them right to hand where you could deal with them there. Not in this form where you can see them move but you can't touch them.
Voodoo curses, uttered in faraway Mississippi, and having an effect on a woman in suburban North London, it seems impossible to believe. But Gay's own accounts of her ordeal, even when they're related sometime after the event, are very disturbing. She claims that she has been psychically raped.
Well, when I was raped in Suffolk, it's like I was sitting on the bed, and it was like somebody pinched my backside and made me jump. And I started getting cramps in my stomach. And I had to sit down. And then I just felt this thing inside of me. And the pain was excruciating. And I just went berserk. Because I knew what was happening, but I didn't know how to stop it. And I was running around banging my back into the wall, thinking that might get it off. And I pleading with it to stop it. It was really, really hurting. And it felt like it was going to come through my stomach.
Because of the strangeness of the circumstances, a question about the state of Gay's mind cannot be avoided. Has she suffered a series of psychic attacks, or is the problem linked to her own anxieties, her own fantasies?
When I get a case of this sort, in order to judge the validity of it, I take into account the personality of the person as far as I'm able to assess it, first of all over the telephone or maybe on first acquaintance. I also take into account the type of phenomena that they describe. I mean, by now I've a fairly good idea of what characterises a real event and what characterises something which is psychotic. And I judged from my talk with her that this was genuine.
Yeah. When I first had all this trouble and I was raped, I went to see a doctor in Suffolk, my doctor in Suffolk, and I told him what had happened. And he, of course, wanted me to see a psychiatrist. And I was all for it. I would have loved nothing more than to be told I was mad, because I didn't understand. So I saw this psychiatrist that was there for that day. And the first thing he asked me was, what did I hear voices? Was I hearing voices? And I just went crazy, because if I heard voices, I could ask them, and I'd hear a reply, what's going on. And after everything cooled down, I told him everything that had happened, the psychiatrist, and he was from Addenbrooke's in Cambridge. And he turned around and he told me that he was going back to tell my doctor in the next room that I needed no medication. And as far as he was concerned, I was saner than he was. And that he was only sorry that he didn't know anybody that he could put me in contact with.
In some considerable desperation, Gay and John eventually sought help. they called in Eddie Burks, one of this country's leading psychic mediums. Despite the power of John and Gay's story, Eddie Burks found no alien presence in the house.
Have you an upright chair, like a kitchen chair? Have you got an upright chair I could use? So you've not been too troubled today?
I've been... there's been things around me, but
yes,
not the smell of it.
Yeah, no. When I met her, this confirmed my feeling that this was genuine. And so therefore I was rather pleased that I'd been called in to help. Has it been quiet all day? There really is no influence in this place at all at the moment, as far as I can see. It's just gone. It's kept out of the way.
Yeah,
that's
the feeling I've got as well.
It's kept out of the way. I would normally expect to go into a house like that and get some sense of the psychic ambience of the place. But when I went in, it was as though it had been cleaned out. It was clear. And I thought about this and came to the conclusion that the unpleasant psychic phenomena, the entities concerned, had withdrawn completely, because they would quite clearly have anticipated my coming. They would have known all about it. It was talked about, it was mentally projected and so on. They got out of the way. Can you feel the presence that's in this room now? It's different, isn't it, to the dark presence? The intention is to flood this place with light. Not the sort of light we can see with the ordinary vision, but the bright light of the angelic presence that's here, which has a great power of cleansing. It has an astringent quality, and will make this place untenable by the forces of darkness. I'd like to just, can you join hands and I'll as a threesome. This will help to protect you as well. I do all this in the name of God, in the name of Jesus. I would like to seal off this visit with the Lord's Prayer, which you can join me in this if you wish. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. The individual left on their own and not having access to this sort of help is best advised to use prayer, to go back to whatever religious belief they have, if they have one. Most people have from their young days, and use that as the platform from which they begin to build up a defence. Religious traditions have a power of their own. Whatever they come from, they have a power of their own. And in a sense, what the religious tradition does is offer a power in the same region of the non-material that the attack is coming from.
There are many ways in which you can protect yourself. There's the cross, the Bible, certain scriptures from the Bible you can use. There are rings and chains, charms, collars, and actual lines and sayings that you will actually get only from a voodoo priestess. Only you can get that from to protect yourself.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye-bye, John. God bless you. Bye-bye. God bless you.
just say different. The heat that seemed to just come on all of a sudden, I can still feel it all over me. It's almost like there's energy or something rippling up and down my back. And my mood feels a bit lighter.
They won't challenge. And they knew Eddie was coming. So that's why he probably didn't pick anything up, except it had been here. But they would have been destroyed if they'd been here, and Eddie, when Eddie came. So maybe that's the last of them here, at least.
For a while after Eddie's visit, the house remained calm and quiet. But since then, Gay says, the alien spirits have returned to haunt her.
It was the most amazing thing in my whole life. After 26 years with the police, I did see it once, and that's enough.
She was screaming in intense pain, and then they appeared, suddenly and clearly before my very eyes. I could see the vicious marks of the teeth on her hand and all over her arms.
This is one of the most interesting cases to appear in Belgium for a very long time, and certainly one of the most interesting in Europe.
Fleurus is a small town in the southern corner of Belgium. It lies close to the border with France, and the language spoken here is indeed French. The whole area has been badly hit by the recession across Europe, and there is a high level of unemployment here and general economic hardship. It's also a part of the country that doesn't have a particularly attractive reputation. Belgians talk of it as being reclusive, shut off, and highly superstitious. Certainly in recent years, there have been frequent stories in the local press and TV, for example, about the practice of witchcraft and black magic, and a quite extraordinary cluster of paranormal events in the area.
It is because people have no jobs. They suffer severe economic problems. They want some sort of security and a feeling of well-being. So, they seek out things beyond the material world, and eventually fall into the trap of playing with black magic. These are things beyond their knowledge, and they simply do not know how to handle the forces which are released. That is why they have so many problems.
Indeed, these practices seem to have become so entrenched in the local society, and the effects on both communities and individuals so damaging, that Father Moran has become more or less a full-time exorcist. Father Moran is a Monsignor, or senior priest, in the Catholic Apostolic Church of Belgium, which broke away from the Roman Catholic Church some 200 years ago. It's a very traditional church. It still holds its masses in Latin, for example. He has a team of priests whose job it is to respond to people, whether they're members of the church or not, who run into psychic or emotional problems as a result of their contact with the paranormal. And it seems there are many of them. He receives as many as 20 calls a week.
In just a single week, it is not uncommon for us to receive 20 phone calls. Calls come in almost every day. People of all religions, or no religion, can become gripped in fear at any time. They claim to have seen or felt all sorts of things. Above all, they say they have poltergeists, or that they are possessed.
As Father Moran has gone about his work over the past few years, he's come to form what some might call a most unholy alliance, an alliance with the world of science. He seeks the widest possible understanding of the forces he has to deal with. And so he's formed a close working relationship with Professor Vladimir Verovaki, a biologist and lecturer in parapsychology. These two inhabit different worlds. They have in many ways totally different points of view, and they frequently disagree on the fundamental explanation for these psychic events. But together they seem to make a most powerful team. They have become two of Europe's most celebrated ghost hunters.
En effet, il s'agit de collaboration entre un prêtre.
Ours is a collaboration between a priest, a man of religion who works in the field, and a scientist who comes armed with his scientific methodology and know-how. You could categorize the collaboration between Patrick Moreau and me as a two-way exchange of information, of access to cases and expertise. The church informs me of the many telephone calls they receive daily, of the variety of problems in cases reported. I know that people can suffer from causes which many scientists reject out of hand. I try to concentrate on those cases where no so-called natural explanations can be found.
Professor Vladimir is very knowledgeable and is helping us enormously. If I am not mistaken, he has performed 25 years of research into paranormal phenomena, poltergeists and so on. His expertise is unquestionable, and he has personally investigated areas other scientists choose to ignore. This type of learned assistance better enables us to sort out which phenomena can be dealt with by science and which must remain within the realm of religion.
One of the most extraordinary cases in which they worked together involves a young man called Eric Barbet. At the time, Barbet was in his early 20s. He lived in his fiancée's home, and it seems there was a good deal of friction with his girlfriend's mother. And then in 1993, a whole series of strange events began to take place. It started with unexplained noises and objects moving apparently of their own accord. Gradually over the months, the events became more violent, with objects flying across the room, even heavy pieces of furniture apparently lifting a foot or more off the ground.
We were all sitting together at the table, my parents and my fiancée's parents, and the table started to rise up into the air. So I decided to sit on a chair, but the chair started to move. Then all sorts of things started to happen. Chairs, tables, things on shelves, whatever, they all started to move. And I was not the only one to see it. Then everything broke down in the kitchen. Nothing in the kitchen was normal. There was milk on the ceiling, cutlery on the floor, food everywhere. A terrible mess. So, what could we do? We couldn't carry on like this.
These kinds of events were witnessed by several people in the house on a number of occasions. And then Barbet himself began to be affected physically. He fell into a trance, for example, in which it seems he spoke in languages he himself didn't know. He felt unwell, as if, he says, his body had been taken over.
I felt bad. I couldn't stop crying. I fainted when I came down from my room, so they put me in an armchair and called the doctor. The doctor came and wanted to give me an injection. He made all his preparations and began the procedure. Then, something inside of me, this thing started to shout. They say it was not human, that shout. I felt that I was possessed by the devil.
It impressed me at the time, and even today. One thing about Barbet's case is a diversity of phenomena. Very powerful forces must have been at work. These are the very forces which I have set out to explain through the methodology of science. In one case could be found a multitude of paranormal expression. Black magic, possession, spiritualism, poltergeist. They're all here, all kinds of things.
Father Moreau asked Professor Verovaki to analyze the kinds of events that were going on. But he decided to bring the full energy of the church to bear on Barbet. He began a series of exorcisms to drive out what he believed were the evil spirits invading and attacking Barbet's body. These were extraordinarily violent and physical events. Barbet had to be held down, for example, as if he were in some kind of torment. And this is actual film of these exorcisms taking place. At one stage, Father Moreau says he demanded the names of what he believed were these evil spirits, and to his astonishment, Barbet, in a kind of trance, uttered the names of evil spirits that occur in ancient religious texts that he could not possibly have known. In all, Barbet went through as many as 9 or 10 services like this. In the end, it seems he was cured, if that's the appropriate word to use.
Dans le rituel de l'exorcisme, in an exorcism, the priest must remove unwanted spirits which have invaded a host body. And there can be dangers. There can be one or perhaps more than one hostile spirit in the body of the possessed. These spirits fight to keep their footholds in a living body. It is a difficult job, both mentally and physically, to remove them. They seem determined to resist returning to the spirit world, or wherever it is they reside. At the moment of release, when the entity exits the body, it is important that all who are present pray together. This is to ensure that the demon doesn't find another host to enter. This is not an idle threat. It has happened, and I have seen it myself.
Professor Verovaki was deeply involved throughout the entire Barbet case. He kept immensely detailed records of the extraordinary poltergeist activity. In his analysis, he describes Barbet as being the epicenter of what was going on, as if the unexplained energy radiated outwards from him. But his explanation of what was happening during the exorcisms was, as you might expect, totally at variance with Father Moran's. For the professor, it had nothing to do with driving out devils. It was, he argued, a kind of psychiatric treatment, an all-enveloping process of psychotherapy.
There were actually a few attempts at exorcising the spirit, and we can see that the result was positive. It took several tries, and these were often long and sometimes painful, but ultimately the phenomena ceased. Today, Eric seems fine, completely normal. But we must ask what really happens in an exorcism. Rituals similar to exorcism seem to have taken place in almost every society since the beginning of recorded civilization, and undoubtedly long before that. The fact that people seem to have some sort of spirit inside of them has been interpreted in many ways. Is a demon really expelled from a body? I don't think so. For a scientist like myself, it is nothing more than primitive psychotherapy. In fact, you could call exorcism the forefather, the ancestor of modern psychoanalysis.
But whatever the explanation, the spiritual one from Father Moran, or the parapsychological one from Professor Verovaki, the facts of the matter seem to be that Barbet was cured. He took a job again and resumed his normal life. But perhaps the most extraordinary thing to emerge from the Barbet case is that neither the priest nor the scientist questioned the reality of the events they'd witnessed, the strange paranormal activity, the way in which furniture and objects moved across a room violently and with great energy. Just a few miles away from the house in southern Belgium, where Eric Barbet had his strange experiences, there was another case in which these two ghost hunters, the priest and the professor, became involved. Once again, it concerned a family who was swept along in a series of quite extraordinary events that they simply could not comprehend. They were so far outside their normal experience, with one person seemingly the focus of the energy and activity that was going on. In this case, the daughter of the house, Valerie. When the event started, Valerie was just 16. She lived with her parents in a neat, middle-class house in the town of Ronsard. She was a student, and there was, it seems, a fair amount of conflict in the house between the daughter and her parents. But whatever the underlying situation, suddenly, as if from nowhere, Valerie began to suffer what seemed to be a series of physical attacks from something unseen and unheard. The effects on Valerie were tangible and visible. Marks and bruises began to appear on her arms and body. She claimed they appeared entirely spontaneously, and there are several witnesses who are prepared to support that. Witnesses speak, for example, of Valerie's face actually being slapped, audibly and visibly, in their presence, by something completely unseen. And because of the physical attacks, the police were called in.
I placed my hands on her cheeks. It was important for me to try to experience this phenomenon for myself. I asked the thing, the demon, the power that was smacking her face, to smack some more, so that I could feel the smacks on my hands. I didn't feel them, but as the girl was smacked, I could feel her face becoming red hot. and her head was jerking with each smack. And I could hear the smacks distinctly, each one, but all I felt on my hands was this strange feeling of heat. And then it beat me. I could feel this thing upon me, close and violent. And these yin and yang marks rose up on my stomach, and scratches and letters on my arms. The letters formed into the word devil on my arms, and then everything went crazy. The furniture started moving, doors smashing.
Afterwards, I looked closely at Valerie. It was as if you took her hand and bit it. Even I, who has witnessed so many things, could hardly believe what I was seeing. I have seen the work of these demons many times, but never with such clarity and in so close proximity. There were teeth marks all over her arms and scratches too. It happened right before my eyes. Valerie was only 20 centimeters from me when I saw those scratches suddenly appear on her arms and shoulder.
There were times when the family were together, the four of us having a good time. Suddenly my daughter would scream and a scratch would appear on her face. From out of nowhere there would come a scratch. Who was doing it? No one could do a thing like that to themselves. My daughter was covered with scratches, just like this one, not only on her face but on her whole body. Scratches with the symbols of evil, or of the devil himself. Someone was doing this. How could a young girl do these things to herself, make such a scratch on her face? It would swell from nothing and start to bleed. After the blood flowed for a bit, it would coagulate, and the scratch would stay on her face for about a week.
On top of this, there was constant and violent poltergeist activity. Objects and furniture began to move, seemingly at random, while people were in the same room, often crashing into the wall and breaking because of the energy being generated. It seemed totally inexplicable. Even the senior police officers who spent time in the house have made official statements about the events they witnessed, admitting they couldn't suggest any rational explanation.
C'est que, étant présente toujours donc dans ce living en compagnie de mes collègues.
We were in the living room, myself and colleagues from the police, sitting around the table. We were observing everything intently and making notes. At one point, one of the chairs was empty. Suddenly, it started moving. I was amazed. It was the very first time that I personally had witnessed this kind of phenomenon. In fact, I was more than amazed. I was troubled, disturbed. I stood up to see if there was some mechanism or other, some external force making the chair move. Perhaps a thread around the chair's leg. I observed with all my power. There was nothing. The chair, it was completely normal.
It was all happening, amazing things, unbelievable things, for about 5 or 6 minutes and then nothing. All the tremendous activity just stopped, dead, except this very strange ambience which gripped the room, a cold and sinister atmosphere we couldn't explain. I made notes and recorded it all. These were the strangest and most puzzling things I've ever encountered. If I had to report to a judge, I would have to tell him to his face and not over the phone or in a report, otherwise he would think that I'd had too much to drink.
When we saw all these things flying at Valerie, we tried to protect her, even if it meant putting her own body in the path of the things that were flying about. Then everything started to fly toward us. They came at us and came at us. These things were the work of the devil, or of curses, on objects that had come into our house. We were threatened, even hurt, like Valerie. When you have a child, you have to protect her, to help the child. So I was in front of Valerie, and I got it myself.
The police were completely at a loss over what seemed to be going on in the house. And apart from recording it in detail, they felt there was nothing they could do. It was outside their experience. So they called in Father Moran and Professor Verovaki. It seems there can be little doubt about the strange events having taken place, however otherworldly they may seem. They were witnessed by so many different people, either together or separately, and at quite different times. Moreover, it's not often in these cases you get two signed statements from senior police officers. But what about the cause? What was going on? Once again, there was a great difference of view between the priest and the professor. Father Moran is convinced that it is essentially external. For him, the events represented a clear attack of evil forces, perhaps channeled through disturbed spirits, as he called them, and allowed to take hold on the house because a channel had been opened up by the conflict between the members of the family. The energy was essentially spiritual energy.
There is no question that there exists souls of dead people who have not found eternal rest. These souls survive in a state neither fully in the land of the living nor in the land of the dead. It is difficult to explain, but we are certain they exist. Demons have the ability to utilize these souls of the dead for the projection of energy. Sometimes a person finds herself overflowing with energy, a trapped energy which cannot be expressed or released. Such a person may become vulnerable to the actions of the spirits of the dead. Souls can interfere with people's lives. Souls can play with people, influence them emotionally, and they can move things about. So where does the energy to do all this come from? Everybody has tried to find out. But for us, the energy comes from God, or from the devil.
Once again, Professor Verovaki made a most detailed study. He actually witnessed the objects moving about, apparently of their own accord. In his analysis, he has no doubt that these events occurred. But he sees the energy as being essentially internal, psychic energy, triggered by the turmoil within Valerie herself.
Cette énergie probablement provient de l'intérieur de la matière.
This energy appears to come from the very elements which compose the body, and it seems to be at the epicenter of the poltergeist activity. Now somehow the person at the center is able to unwittingly marshal this energy and organize it or focus it to move objects. And the objects do move, break or disappear.
Clearly, there can be no cast iron proof either way. We're dealing here with a mystery. And it has to be said, both the victims of the events, the mother and Valerie herself, violently disagree with both analyses.
I still don't know why all this happened, but I do know that I'm not responsible. They say there was no possession, so that meant that my family, or me, that we were doing this ourselves. You would have to be mad to do this to yourself. All the hurt, all the pain. To do this kind of thing to yourself, you must be mad.
Either way, Father Moran did not believe that this was a case of possession. After living very close to the events for over 6 weeks, he refused to carry out a full-scale exorcism. He was only prepared to bless the house, to seal it, as he described it, from evil.
After 30 days, things started to calm down a bit. Paranormal activity had almost ground to a halt. But everyone was still suffering, especially Valerie. Often when a child suffers, it is difficult for parents to come to terms with the real cause. You see, nobody understood the transformation through which she had gone, and they were not prepared to admit the cause, to admit that somehow they bore a part of the responsibility.
A variety of physical phenomena has been experienced. Things moving, appearing, disappearing. From what I have seen and others have seen, there is no doubt that these happenings are real. How much evidence is required to state that something exists? I mean, only a few people have walked on the moon, yet we all believe it. Yet, in Randstad, things have been reported by the most skeptical and reliable of witnesses, and there are those who are still prepared to doubt. Now, all this phenomena has been fully verified. Policemen, priests, the family, even I have confirmed these events. I am confident that at least 90% of the observed phenomena actually happened.
However we respond to any of these explanations, these cases undoubtedly raise immense problems for conventional science. It seems difficult to challenge the fact that the events took place, if only because of the reliability of some of the key witnesses and the detail of the record. But whether we incline towards Father Moran's essentially religious explanation, or Professor Verovaki's psychosomatic one, both in a very real sense hinge on a pretty astounding claim, namely that there is a powerful link between the events going on in, for example, Valerie's mind and the violent movement of physical objects in the house. Mind, that is, moving matter. But the stranger-than-fiction fact is that there are researchers in several very eminent universities on both sides of the Atlantic who would say that that concept would be in keeping with the results of their own research.